Hello, fellow refiners. Welcome to another episode of Refinement, Not Retirement. My name is Tony Coe, and I'm podcasting today, as usual, from the gorgeous Cotswolds village of Elmley Castle. First of all, thanks to all of you for your very kind feedback on our previous episode, which was about another of our refinements, pickleball, and was with the American Jared Franklin, who was amazing, and his amazing company, Franklin Sports. Loved all your feedback. Thank you for that. But this is about today. I usually co-host with my wife, Christine, but she's not joining me today. And instead, I have another very special guest that I'm excited to introduce you to. And he's another American. Sorry, but you know, we have seem to get a lot of Americans on the show, so that's a lovely thing. This is about another refinement, which is a very special refinement in our lives, and that is one that we talked about on a couple of previous episodes, and it's about going vegan. Our guest today is a very special travel friend of ours. His name is Dave Brett Wasser. Is that how you pronounce your name, Dave?
That is.
Very good, and welcome to you. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a very interesting background for those of you who are joining the video version of this. What's that lovely wall behind you, Dave?
Well, I've always loved a Dutch artist named Piet Mondrian. He was the first half of the 20th century. He did these abstract artworks using primary colors. And so I decided to create a wall in tribute to the type of art that he creates. And I deliberately put it there so it's behind my back during video calls like this. So,
well, it's very attractive. So thank you for setting that all up for us. Now, we should mention that we met on a vegan river cruise. Well, in fact, we've met on a few vegan river cruises. Well, in fact, I think we've also
lost track of how many have we been on together.
We've been on quite a few, and you're always there, and you're always fascinating to talk to, which is so that's I can't wait to talk to you about this particular subject. So I'm going to let you, if I may, introduce yourself and say what you're all about.
Sure. Well, I'm 56 years old. I'm from New York City originally. I now live in the great state of Texas, in Austin in particular. And I became a vegetarian more than 30 years ago, and then it was a sort of a slow transition to veganism. About 6 years ago, suddenly realized that I was putting my money into investments which helped finance the companies which produce the products which I boycott as a consumer. Because I don't eat animal products, I don't wear animal products, but I was putting my money into standard mutual funds, which are indirectly giving my money to the companies that produce those products. And I suddenly realized, wait, what am I doing here? I mean, if you stop and think about it, if Tyson Foods is the largest meat producer in the world, if Tyson Foods had a choice of you being a consumer of their chicken or an investor in their company, which do you think they would prefer? You're giving them a lot more money on the investment side. Now, of course, plenty of vegans and vegetarians don't have money to invest, and so this isn't an issue for them. But for those who do have the money to invest, I think it's kind of a blind spot. It certainly was for me for many years. So this was all about 6 years ago. I went online, I started looking for vegan investments, and I was stunned to find that none existed. There were none. Now there are, in part because of the work that I and some other people have done. But there were no vegan mutual funds. So I went to my financial advisor and I told him I wanted to avoid investing in companies that exploit animals. And he was, perfectly cooperative with that, as he has to be. He wants to keep me as a client. He said, well, look, give me a list of all the companies that exploit animals on the stock exchange. And then every time I buy stock for your account, I'll just cross-check that list. So I said, I assumed that such a list existed. So I went online and spent about an hour or two online and was again stunned to find that no such list existed. I've since been told that PETA considered a project like this about 20 years ago and abandoned it because they decided it would take too much work, strangely enough. So I created a nonprofit. It's called Cruelty-Free Investing. You can find us on the web. It's crueltyfreeinvesting.org. And I hired some people to help me, and we looked at the business plan of every publicly traded company on each of the three major stock exchanges in the United States, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange and American Stock Exchange. There are about a little under 6,000 publicly traded companies. And it was usually pretty easy just looking at the business plan to see whether or not this is a company that exploits animals. Obviously most agricultural companies are off the list. Biomedical companies which experiment on animals are off the list. Companies which produce leather, wool, or fur are on the exploit list and off the non-exploit list. And the good news is that after we compiled all of our research, by the way, is all free and available for anyone to look at on our website, Cruelty-Free Investing. We are a nonprofit. We're not doing this to try to make money. There's no advertising on the site. We're just giving this information away for free because we think it's valuable to people to have this information. It took us a long time to compile the information. Individual investors, even financial advisors, don't have the time to do all the work that we did compiling the information and updating it every year. And as I say, the good news is that 3/4 of stocks on the American exchanges are what we consider non-exploitative. 1/4 are. Now, the good news there is that you can still have a diverse portfolio of stocks without investing in companies which abuse and exploit animals. They always say that the fundamental rule of investing is diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And by the way, don't bother me because I just used an animal agriculture analogy by that metaphor.
Yes, yes. Indeed. Yes, I hadn't even noticed that. So that shows.
Well, I noticed, but I thought I better point it out because somebody in the audience said, "Hey, look what he just did."
Yeah. So, good catch there, right? Because I completely missed that.
Thank you. So you've got to diversify, and you can do that. On our website, I urge people to go check us out, cruelty-free-investing.org. There's several different sections. The main part is an alphabetical list of two parallel lists which show which companies do exploit animals and which companies do not. Now, I know that since you're in the UK, I know a lot of your listeners are in the UK. Unfortunately, we simply don't have the time or the resources to do the same kind of research for companies on the London Stock Exchange, much less all of the other stock exchanges in Europe and in Japan and everywhere else.
Yeah, but there are names on that because I've looked at the list and it's great, by the way. But I know there are companies obviously that we would all recognize over here, like Tesla. Oh, sure. Tesla, of course. I've got Tesla, so that immediately jumped out at me. And Amazon, household names like that. But what I was interested to ask you was, what criteria do you use to decide whether a company is exploiting or non-exploitative?
Right. We're singling out companies which directly exploit animals by either creating animal products or selling animal products. Now, we recognize that there's a significant gray area in there. For example, when you give your money to a bank, your bank then takes your money and then loans it out to a company which could be doing horrible things to animals. But we've decided that since banks are not directly exploiting animals, banks are on our non-exploit list. So we're making a distinction between direct and indirect exploitation. If we counted every company which indirectly exploits animals, then there would probably be hardly any companies that are not on that list. So I think it's important for ethical reasons to make a distinction between companies.
Well, so directly would mean like somebody, for instance, like McDonald's, who clearly use animals in their products. What about a sort of big restaurant chain like Pizza Express?
If a restaurant chain serves meat, then we consider that exploitative.
Right. Okay.
They're selling animal. If they're either making or selling animals, but I don't think McDonald's actually makes many animal products. They simply sell them. Yes. I think most of what their supply comes from independent suppliers, although I suppose at this point probably some of it is in-house. So it's whether you're making or selling animal products. And look, my email address is right there on the website, and I think maybe once every month or two I get an email from somebody questioning why we've put a certain company in a particular category and providing information that is sometimes very useful. Somebody says, you may not have caught this, but actually they are using animals, even though it's not clear on this website. And we thank the person, and sometimes we make changes to the database. But I want to go over the other things that you can find on our website. I mean, you can also download the entire database.
Yes, I saw that. Yep.
There's a new feature on the database on the website which just was added last week, which is a listing of all the vegan venture capital funds. And now this is important because the venture capital funds are investing in early stage companies, startups, companies which are trying to produce new products and services that take animals out of the supply chain. This is a risky investment. I wouldn't, if you don't have much money to invest, I would not recommend putting the little money you have into investments like these, because they're risky. Some of the companies that are these venture capital funds are investing in will go out of business. You know that.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that there are two ways of looking at it when you invest. The first is there should be a negative screen. You should avoid investing in companies which do harm. But then the second question, which is perhaps more difficult to answer on an ethical basis, is how much of your money should you put into companies which are doing good? Or how much should you direct your investments towards companies which may be perhaps riskier investments, but have the potential to do far better in our society?
Yes.
And that's a tough question to answer. I mean, in the same sense that, look, if you decide to volunteer your time to help people, how much of your time should you volunteer? 1% of your time, 5%, 10%? There's no easy answer to that question. Everybody has to make a decision for themselves on what they think is best. And that's why I recommend, if you have money to invest, recommend finding a financial advisor. And brings me to another section of our website where we list financial resources. There's a list of financial advisors who are vegan themselves, and so they personally care about this issue. And in many cases, those people have a number of vegan clients who care about this issue. So they're familiar with which companies are on the exploit list, which companies are not, and they're familiar with creating a portfolio which will be consistent with your ethical values. And I just want to briefly talk about how to select a financial advisor. The first thing you should do is don't hire the first person you talk to. That strategy may work, and if you're hiring an electrician or a plumber, but it doesn't work for this. I would interview several people, get a sense of where they stand, where their values are, how much they're willing to work with you to listen. These people have to be good at listening. They have to listen to what amount of risk you're willing to accept and what type of risk you can handle. So I would not hire the first person you talk to. Take a look, talk to people. By the way, also a financial advisor does not have to be local. Most of the time people do that. Most of the time people hire a financial advisor who's local. If you think about it logically, it doesn't really need to be. You can hire somebody 3,000 miles away, because nothing has to be signed in person. Everything is done electronically over computers now. So the person doesn't have to be near you. You can, so as I say, here in America, by the way, we have a concept called fiduciary. And I don't know if that word is maybe familiar, because that word may not be familiar to plenty of people in America, even in people in England. I don't know if they use that word at all, but fiduciary is an ethical standard that financial advisors have to meet, which asserts that that they have to put your interests first. They cannot put their interest in making a profit over your interest in making a profit. Now, it's hard to enforce this. It's more of an ethical standard that financial advisors agree to live by. So look for somebody who is a fiduciary, who's somebody who has credentialed in that area and who is always going to avoid conflicts of interest and always going to put your interest first. Talk to your financial advisor about how much risk you're willing to take. Look closely at the fees these people charge. There's a wide range of different fees. Some are very expensive, and you're not necessarily getting a better product for the higher fee people. As I say, look for credentials. So on our website, cruelty-free-investing.org, you can find a list of financial advisors who, if you are vegan, who are have values consistent with your values. I want to mention also about the vegan venture capital funds. There's a higher threshold for getting into that market. Here in America, we have something called, you have to be an accredited investor, which means you have to meet certain income requirements and certain capital. You have to meet certain capital requirements because they do that for a reason, because these are risky investments. They don't want people putting the little amount of money they have to invest in it. So they want to limit risky investments in venture capital to people who can afford to lose the money if it turns out that way.
Leaving aside the question of the venture capitalist guy, because investing in venture capital is always more risky than anything else, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But just in terms of bog standard, whatever it is, pension funds, you call it 401k or whatever.
Yeah.
Is it likely, if you go this way of looking at the ethics of a company, is it likely that your return will be less? Have you done that? Have you made that measure?
It's very hard to measure that. What we can say is that that generally speaking, the investments, the investments in companies which do not exploit animals do about as well as companies which do. There really isn't that much of it. I mean, look at, as I mentioned, when I started this 6 years ago, there were no vegan funds. Now there are two. There's the Vegan Climate Fund on the New York Stock Exchange. The ticker is VEGN. There's the Veg Tech Invest Fund. And the vegan, if you look at the historical performance of the Vegan Climate Fund, which has been around a little longer, that's mostly in blue chip companies which do not exploit animals. And if you, their returns are actually a little bit better than the rest of the market over the history of the fund. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's usually the first concern people have. If I choose to invest ethically, am I going to be taking a financial hit from it? By all reasonable measures, you almost certainly will not. Now, there's always, the future is not guaranteed. There's always potential that things could change. But at least if you look at past performance, the past performance of companies which do not exploit animals is roughly the same. And in fact, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I've noticed in this area of financial investment advice and so on is that more and more people are moving towards, what would you call them, robo investment platforms. So, for instance, we in the UK have Money Farm is one, which I think is an Italian company. And the one that you might be familiar with is Vanguard. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, well, Vanguard's been around for a long time.
Yeah, it's quite new here. Yeah, it's quite new here. But if you're using that sort of approach, because people who want to save fees, because there is a growing perception in the UK anyway that I can speak to, a growing perception that financial advisors don't provide great value when you actually measure against not having one and having one. What they do, however, is take fees, and those fees are automatically taken regardless of how everything performs. And so people are moving now. If they're using that kind of platform, a robo platform, can they still apply this concept?
Well, yes and no. First of all, Vanguard is interesting. Vanguard is a family of mutual funds, and I think their fees are so low because they're incorporated, I believe, as a nonprofit, not as a for-profit company. And so historically, yeah, Vanguard makes a lot of sense for standard normal mutual funds to buy funds in their family, because you will be paying a lower fee. The problem is that Vanguard does not have an animal-friendly fund. I hope that changes at some point. It changes. I mean, when I started this project, I perhaps was a little naive. I thought companies like Vanguard and others would jump on the bandwagon sooner than they have. But from their perspective, they just don't know whether there's much demand for a vegan fund. And it costs at least $10 million to start up any mutual fund. So there is some risk in it for them. So Vanguard, by the way, I wouldn't call Vanguard a robo fund, but their funds are actively managed by investment professionals. They're just professionals who are taking a lower cut because I say it's a nonprofit structure. Okay. So yeah, no, Vanguard is fine, but they don't currently offer a vegan mutual fund. By the way, it's interesting for those of you who may not know, there's a whole category called by the initials SRI, which stands for socially responsible investing. And there's all kinds of SRI funds which cater to niche interests. There are labor rights funds, which only invest in companies which pay their workers a fair wage. There are feminist funds, which only invest in companies which are run by women. The most popular category are funds which do not invest in alcohol, tobacco, or firearms, because there are a lot of people who do not, for ethical reasons, do not want to invest in companies that produce and sell those products. There are a lot of environmental funds. And by the way, this is a mistake I see a lot of vegans making. I've talked to vegans about their investments. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, I got my money in an environmental fund, so I'm okay. Oh, boy.
Yeah, I can see immediately what you're saying, because I have I have 4 daughters, but I have one daughter who is particularly active on the climate crisis, as she would frame it, global situation, and she everything that she does, when she shops, rather like you do with animals, when she shops, she has that front and center of every decision that she makes. But she eats animals, so
Yeah, for
but
many years, the president of Greenpeace was a meat eater. Which is
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, and you touched on this with when you mentioned about the low demand aspect, because that really seems to apply to every aspect of our issue, veganism generally. I mean, and I think this would be a good time for us to get into what led to this fascinating conversation. Well, I'm finding it fascinating anyway.
Oh, good. You're the one.
What led to this is you sent me a note after our vegan cruise, Paris-Normandy,
yeah,
with Vegan Travel, probably our mutual favorite travel company, obviously. And you said, great seeing you in France, Tony. Can I ask you take a moment to vote for SXSW panel? I thought, what the heck is Dave on about?
Yeah, I can explain.
I think it would be great if you could
Sure.
just put some, oh no, I nearly did it myself. I was going to say put some meat on the bone.
Uh-oh. I know. If I had a nickel for every time I said, "Oh, you're beating a dead horse," and then I think, "Oh, well, what am I using that metaphor?"
Yeah, I know. Oh dear. Wash my mouth out with soap, will you? If you could just frame that.
SXSW stands for South by Southwest, which is at this point pretty much the largest conference here in the United States for new technology, new everything, new music, new industries. For every year for 10 days in the middle of March, people from all over the world come here to Austin and talk about the products they're working on in their companies and new innovations in their field. And it's a very social thing. There's lots of parties, and you get to meet lots of people. And every year they have panels about the future of alternative protein. And this year, I've joined forces with 3 people, including one of the people who runs one of the vegan venture capital funds, which is listed on our site, a woman named Heather Courtney. She runs Alwyn Capital. And my friend Alicia Robb and Sonali Figueres, who is in Hong Kong. And the 4 of us are going to want to give a panel at South by Southwest about the future of alt protein. For alternative protein, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been some kind of negative articles in the last year, which maybe there's kind of a little bit of a backlash to it, because for years, the sales of fake meat were going up and up and up. And people just thought that rise would go on forever. And then it stopped, it plateaued over the last 1 to 2 years. And so people think, oh, well, now people don't like fake meat anymore. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course not. The sales, if you look closely, sales haven't gone down. They've just flattened.
Yes.
And that flattened, look, plenty of industries deal with a, flattened demand at some point, and they change their business plan, and tastes change, and sometimes it goes back up, and sometimes it stays the same. Fake meat still is and alternative protein is still profitable. It's just perhaps the growth has slowed. And so we want to talk about both the so-called fake meat industry and where that's going, but we also want to talk about cultivated meat, which is that has the potential to change much more than anything. I mean, for 30 years I've been trying to change people's values and ethics about animals, and I've been failing miserably. I'm not any good at convincing people to care about animals. I don't know what to say or what not to say.
It's nothing to do with you.
I know.
We have this generally. I mean, it's just that it's so ingrained in the culture, isn't it? So people don't even think they talk about their lovely dogs and cats and all that, and how they spend thousands and thousands on vet bills because they can't bear to be without this furry member of the family. But it doesn't occur to them that they're also eating something that's very similar.
I know. It's so frustrating. And look, I don't know how to change people's values. I know how to give people information but people have to change themselves.
Yeah. Well, they've got to want to change, haven't they? I mean, that's the key, really.
Yeah, you got to want to. First, they got to want to change. And of course, when it comes to veganism, we're not just asking people to change their ideology. We're asking people to change their practice.
Yes.
Which makes it far more difficult.
Yes.
I mean, it's one thing if you're trying to convince people of to believe in your religion, you're just asking them to change their ideology, their belief system. Here, we're asking people to also change their behavior, yes, which is another step and makes it far more difficult. A lot of people will change their philosophical position on something, but will not change their behavior. But anyway, the reason I got into this is that I'm not very good at changing people's values. But ultimately, if science can create meat grown in laboratories. And I know they don't like to call it that because that sort of makes it sound less appealing. So they're trying to call it cultivated meat or cell-grown, cell-cultivated meat or clean meat. I've heard a lot of different, there's a lot of different arguments within the vegan community about what it should be called. Eventually that argument will work itself out. And that has the potential to change the most, because that way people can still continue to eat the product that they know and love. You know, look, I've heard people say that people have a brand identification with meat, in the same sense that, you know, I have a brand identification with Coca-Cola. I've been drinking Coca-Cola my whole life. I love it. I drink it every day. And if somebody came along with a product and said, oh, this is just as good as Coca-Cola, I'd say, well, sorry, I'm not interested because I like Coca-Cola. I have a brand identification with that product. And I think people have a brand identification with meat. And so even if you come along, and look, the great thing is that Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger are so close to the actual taste of meat that in some cases people can't even tell the difference. But even the people who can't tell the difference still want to eat meat because that's what they identify.
Well, and I'm the flip side of that, Dave, because I've noticed this with fellow vegans, and perhaps you've noticed the same thing. That once because I turned vegan for health reasons first and foremost. Then I got interested in the animal exploitation aspect of it. That was secondary.
See, for me, it was reverse.
Okay, well, yeah, I remember you said that to me on board. But the thing is that, and I've noticed this with other vegans who've gone the same path as I have gone, that you get to a point where your whole mindset changes. So when you're going through a supermarket, for instance, and you pass the butcher counter, I recoil because I see that as body parts. So I would feel, and I have eaten cultivated meat.
Where did you get to eat it?
Okay, so we tried a restaurant in London on our one and only visit to London since moving to the countryside. To see it, we went to see ABBA Voyage, you know, the Avatar version of ABBA, which was fantastic, by the way. But we also took the opportunity of visiting a vegan restaurant which is a Michelin starred in London called Gautier, and they had a cultivated meat.
Is that regularly on the menu, or is that just a special thing for?
I don't know the answer to that, but it was part of their tasting menu, which is really basically all they do, but they probably change it a lot. And it was, you know, many courses, like as you get with tasting menus, and most of the courses were fantastic. But we got to a stage where this cultivated meat came out, and I immediately had that visceral reaction. Actually, Christine enjoyed it, but I had that reaction. The other thing I noticed about, reminding you that health was my first reason. The other thing I noticed from the material that you sent me, or the material I was linked to for that panel, that the young guy who, young compared to me, not you, but the young guy who was promoting his company that is involved in this area, he was very honest that there is no difference health-wise between cultivated meat and actual meat. So that would be
what they're trying to do is produce a product which is identical. That's what they're trying to do.
They are, but he did go on to say that we aim to crack that too, which I think would be a big, very significant step forward, because, you know, this cultivated meat contains cholesterol, and it contains saturated fat, so it also blocks arteries.
Right. But the good thing is that no hormones or antibiotics were used in the production of this.
Oh, that's a good thing. And of course, it reduces
so it will be healthier
diseases
overall.
Yeah. So pandemics as well, you know, it's good from that point of view. And it's good for the planet. It ticks all those boxes. It's good for climate. It's, you know, it's land mass, you know, use of land, all of that. I buy all of that. But I'm just mentioning that, you know, that sort of visceral aspect. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I know. And look, it's all a question of whether this can be done at scale. Yes. I mean, they already can do it. Yes. It's just a question of whether it can be done in the kind of scale. Look, even if you get to a point where you can produce a single hamburger for the same cost as a hamburger that comes from an actual cow, then there's going to be the whole problem of how do you build up the enormous number of factories which will be required to produce this.
Yes.
I mean, you would have to start from scratch. I mean, the ranches where cows are grown and bred and slaughtered, or that infrastructure is already in place. They don't have to build that from scratch. It's already there.
Yes.
Whereas all of the infrastructure to produce cultivated meat will have to be built up from scratch. And I want to mention one more thing about the vegan venture capital funds and how much things have changed. I think as recently as 5 years ago, I think there was only one vegan venture capital fund in the world. Now there are 11. Yeah. Which shows you how much more interest there is in this type of investment. How you're seeing people look. It's not just vegans who are investing in this. It's people like Bill Gates, who's not a vegan.
May I ask you this, because we are actually getting very close to our cutoff point, but can I just ask you this, because we obviously gravitate with the same vegan crowd that travels on the vegan travel cruises. What kind of reaction do you get to people when you talk about cruelty-free from actual vegans?
That's a good question. I mean, people seem to like the idea, and people think, oh, that's terrific. I'm so glad you're doing it. But most of the people I talk to really don't have. Well, first of all, I don't know how much money they have to invest, but I don't necessarily get the sense that they have a lot of money to invest. I mean, a lot of people, like, as you say, have just a 401k. They go, well, I've got a 401k through my job, and there's a little money invested there, but I don't control it. I don't, and that's, by the way, an important point. Most people don't get to control where their money in their 401k is invested. Some people do, depending on, every company has a different policy. Some people give their employees the freedom to direct their investment in a certain way, but others do not.
I just say, just for our UK visitors, for a 401k, read pension.
Yeah, right. It's a retirement account.
Yeah, retirement. Yeah,
go
ahead.
You can't take the money out until you reach 65. Without paying a penalty.
Sure.
But the benefit is that when you put money in, it's tax-free. That you don't.
So it's sort of similar to the UK. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess I haven't really talked about it with enough people. My sample size isn't large enough, but with the few people I have talked about it, all say it's a great idea. I'm so glad you're doing it. And then they say that they're going to check out the website, and I don't know if they do. In most cases, I don't really hear from them again. But the hardest thing about running cruelty-free investing is just getting the word out and letting people know that this exists. Look, when I got like Veg News and Live Kindly and the small vegan press, they all covered this and that's the low-hanging fruit. I mean, getting in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times is the really hard part. And perhaps when I started this, I was a little naive. I thought all I'd have to do was just put out a press release and, mainstream media would cover this. Well, they really haven't, because the people, every story that gets in the mainstream media is filtered through the values and the ethics of the people who write and edit the news. And if the people who write and edit the news are not vegan themselves and don't care about this issue, it's not likely they're going to care enough to want to bother, putting the time into it. And also because they know that only maybe 1 or 2% of their readers care about this. So they're looking to cover issues which matter to a larger percentage of their own readers. So it's just very tough. I mean, I've hired a few, media companies to help me try to get press, and it hasn't worked out.
Good.
So yeah, unfortunately, it's word of mouth and podcasts. And so yeah, I humbly ask your viewers to check out our website and then post about it on social media.
Just one more time, Dave. What's the website?
It's cruelty-free investing ing at the end .org.
And in one sentence, before I wrap up, anything else you'd like to add to what you've already said? One sentence.
Oh gosh. I should come up with some little pithy statement that really sums up everything I've said over the last half hour, but I don't have it.
That's fine, because you're a very good communicator. You made it all very, very clear. And frankly, I would love to continue this I could talk easily 2-3 hours with you.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe we will find opportunities to have further discussions, because I think you're great on this whole area.
Okay, I do have one little thing to add. It's just that if you do visit our website, please send me an email. The email address is right there on the site, and that'll let me know that you saw this podcast, and so that will make me feel better that if I got you to look at my website from this podcast, then this is a success. So please send me a message.
Great.
telling
Well,
me,
I will be. Well, I'd like to hear from them too about that,
yeah,
because it would make me feel good.
send messages to both of us.
Yeah, that would be terrific. Well, thank you so much, Dave. You're such an exciting and interesting guy to listen to, and I've loved it. I can't wait to join you on the next, be with you on the next vegan travel cruise that we will no doubt be doing quite soon. Just say to everybody, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I certainly did. We're still a young podcast, and we're growing our audience. We need your help, so please like, share, continue to give your lovely feedback. You know how to find us, Facebook page of the same name. And do check us out everywhere, Spotify for podcasters, Apple Podcasts, etc., etc., etc. But now I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to say thank you again to my special guest, Dave. And for now, it's goodbye from me. And of course, it's goodbye from Dave. So
Bye,
thanks a lot.
everybody.
Bye for now.
Thanks for listening.